Okay, maybe I'll get started. And so the first thing I want to do is welcome everyone to this week's EEB seminar. And in particular, I'd like to welcome members from the Ontario University's Program in Field Biology, or OUPFB, as well as those who've joined us from other universities. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Queen's is situated on the traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. And we're grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. And the reason we do the acknowledgement to this traditional territory is to recognize that it has a longer history, one that predates the establishment of the earliest European colonies. And it also acknowledges that this territory's significance for Indigenous people who have lived and continue to live on it, and who practice whose practices and spiritualities were tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the territory and the other inhabitants today. So today we're going to have a panel discussion that's going to be moderated by Dr. Rhiannon Bazely and populated by three early career scholars, Jacqueline, Peter, and Jess, who Don will introduce. And they've been besides just doing their day jobs, they're also activists for increasing human diversity and inclusion in wild spaces. And the idea for this panel first started because OUPFB members have been working towards setting up awards that would encourage and facilitate the participation of underrepresented students in field courses. And this was actually something that was initiated in our department by Regan and Nell and the Biology Graduate Student Council. And then I took their idea of establishing some scholarships aimed at BIPOC students to the OUPFB. And now many of the universities within the OUPFB have committed to establishing new field course awards, and including 4 in our own department. So while establishing and awarding these scholarships is a really important first step, there's much more that we can do to make field ecology and evolution more welcoming and inclusive. And I want to thank our panelists for coming here today and using their valuable time and resources to increase our awareness of the barriers that underrepresented groups face and to lead a discussion on ways that we can eliminate those barriers. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Don to introduce our panelists and the discussion topics.
Thanks so much, Shelley, and thank you very much for providing us with this fixed time and place at which to raise these really important issues that have really been thrown into sharp relief this summer with murders of many young, in particular, young Black people in the United States. And I just want to say that Breonna Taylor was killed the day that most Ontario universities closed their campuses because of the pandemic. And when I read about her death the next day, I was particularly struck, not just because she's a young Black woman whose home was invaded. She thought she was safe there, but also because she is a health worker who works on COVID-19. That was her job, was working on COVID-19. So it was a kind of, for me, a double outrage. So some of us have been sitting with this for a long time. Our panel members have been sitting with this issue since the day they were born, and I'm really excited to introduce them to you. I'm going to give a very short framing introduction. I'm going to share my screen and then get through a few framing slides, and then we'll turn you over to the panel. The meeting, it is being recorded for the many people who wanted to attend and couldn't make it. Okay, so first thing that I need to do is share my screen, and I am not seeing what I need to share. Bear with me. In a minute. Oh, ooh. My Chrome, here we are. Okay, hang on a minute. Now what's going on here? Sorry, technical issues. It was working before, and now it's not working. Okay, hang on a minute. I should be able to, oh, here we are. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so as Shelley has explained, the impetus for this panel came from a conversation that happened this summer amongst the 16 member universities in the Ontario University field program in biology about how to make ecology basically less white. So let me see if I can, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to go to the next slide. Okay, all right, so, okay, here we are, hang on a minute. Yes, figured it out. Okay, right. So I just want to introduce our panel from left to right here on the slides, my left to my right. We have Peter Soroye, who is a PhD student at the University of Ottawa, where he is currently doing his PhD with Jeremy Kerr's group, looking at climate change and land use change in pollinators. He recently had a fantastic paper in, I think it was Science, Peter, back in the spring, very high profile big data paper, so props to you. I know you'd rather be doing science. Our second panel member is Jacqueline Scott, and Jacqueline has worn many hats over her lifetime and career, from human resources and equity diversity as having a professional standing in that area, but she's currently doing her doctorate at OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. And her research is working on outdoor recreation, environmental discourse, and how to make it more welcoming for Black people. She is a natural historian, a citizen scientist, and she got to spend recently a week in Algonquin Park paddling, and I am still so jealous. Our third panel member is Jessica Winters, and Jessica is an Inuk, that is one Inuit, from Nunatsiavut on the coast of Labrador. She is an artist. She is a biologist. She is currently working for the government of Nunatsiavut. She is coming to us from Makhovik, and she did an undergraduate degree in ecology and conservation biology at Memorial University. And I got to spend nearly a month last summer actually working with her in ecotourism. She is our third panel speaker. So, okay, topics that we're going to address. Put this here so I can see. And we're going to go around. We're not going to have three speakers speaking on just one, just speaking at once, but we're going to go round and round, so we'll get a lot of conversation and discussion that I'll facilitate. Is big challenges that prevent historically excluded groups from participating in ecology. Steps to making concrete change, because we want to see change. It is very long overdue. We want to also specifically address the undergraduate experience, because we've been talking about getting scholarships set up to make expensive field courses that might be prohibitive for some people to participate in ecology. Is it enough to give a scholarship? What about all those microaggressions? How do you actually support undergraduates from racialized communities so that they're not exposed to implied hostility? We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about the emotional burden of equity, diversity, and inclusion work, including the work of doing panels like this. And I'm hoping that Peter will share some of his stories, because he's been a lot on the CBC, helping with and organizing, I should say, and leading Black Birders Week in Canada. You know, really, all ecologists, we'd rather be doing our research rather than talking about issues like this. And we're going to talk about how we shift that workload from the shoulders of students and faculty from equity-seeking groups onto the shoulders of the privileged. Yes, and we know who those are. And if you don't know who they are, I'm actually going to tell you who they are. And we also need to talk about how we recognize Indigenous scholarship from the viewpoint of traditional Western science. There is more than one way of knowing. How do we deal with that? Okay, so a fourth panel member couldn't be here. Dr. Sailita Guy, that many of you will know from the Canadian Society for Ecology and Evolution and the Canadian Science Communication Graduate Student-Led Conference. But Sailita, I've known Sailita since she was a field worker doing urban ecology in Hyde Park in Toronto. And she's got some very specific input that she wants to talk about how one supports ecologists doing urban ecology who are members of racialized groups who may be exposed to racist comments and remarks. And I want to particularly just say that my context for this is that my very first undergraduate biology honours thesis student was Debbie Gibson at York University in 1991. She was a mum of two young kids while doing her biology degree. She got straight A's. She did an honours thesis that was published in Ecology. So I know there are excellent Black ecologists that have been around for decades. Most recently, about a month ago, a young Black woman working in my lab, Cheyenne Gums, she just left to go to start her master's in epidemiology. Weirdly, both Cheyenne and Debbie both went on to did masters in epidemiology. Debbie actually works in Washington, DC now and is quite a big shot actually with professional society. But Cheyenne is just the most recent excellent young Black scholar in my lab, 30 years apart. So for me, it's a question of, well, where are the Black women ecology professors and young Black male ecology professors and Indigenous ecology professors? Because I'm still not seeing them. And we all know about the leaky pipelines for Canadian women in research, but what about the leaky pipeline for our colleagues who are ecologists and evolutionary biologists from racialized communities? And this is just a little tweet from last year. Cheyenne and another undergraduate student spoke at the Digital Pedagogy conference at Waterloo. And one of the reasons why I wanted them to come was because the keynote speaker was pedagogy expert, Dr. Tanisha Taylor. And I wanted Cheyenne to see a senior Black woman academic so that she could understand that this is a path that I'm pushing her on, and she needs to go, and well, I hope she'll go there because she wants to go there and she needs to see herself. So one of the things that's happened over my career is that STEM scholars in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics have been very remiss in overlooking the mountain of peer-reviewed scholarly research from the social sciences on why we're not shifting the numbers. And the one thing that I hope that all my white male colleagues will do after they leave this talk is go and watch eminent sociology professor Michael Kimmel's 14-minute TED Talk. He wrote the book Angry White Men, and it's been viewed over 2 million times. And he will tell you why a Black woman did not take what you think mistakenly is your job. So the scholarship is out there. I crunched numbers. I've served on 15 hiring committees, not including the postdoc ones. And what I'm discovering, increasingly observing, as my understanding of the equity, diversity, and inclusion scholarship literature has grown over the last 10 years, is I have many colleagues, my age or younger, who still are failing to make the connection between affirmative action policies in our institution, the scholarship, and their own unconscious biases. And here are some these QR codes. This will take you directly to the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. It's now 5 years old, and many of those calls to action center around education. This is a document that every academic in Canada should read. Other homework that I'd love to see you do is to learn the meaning of these terms, intersectionality. And here's the eminent scholar, the originator 30 years ago, law professor Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, in her Wikipedia image, a very important concept and lens for us. Gaslighting and mansplaining, I'm just going to park those there. The Dunning-Kruger effect, where certain people who are not particularly great or fairly mediocre tend to think that they're better than they are, and high-performing, often women and members of racialized communities who tend to think they're worse than they are. Then there's unconscious bias, cognitive dissonance, and bias. These are all areas that social science colleagues have given us insight into. Other actions include reading about the racism scale, reading this recent paper in one of the Nature journals by Sailita Guy and colleagues about recreating Wakanda. Read the Reconciliation Commission calls to action. Here's a link to a book. This is actually a Guardian long read, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Thank you to Peter for that one. support activists who are science students. So I'm wearing the, I don't know if you can see it, a Black Lives Matter pin from Two Photon Art, who 2 PhD students in California who are not only scientists, but they're artists. So we've got Jess Winters on the panel. She's not only a scientist, she's an artist. You can straddle more than one area and be excellent in both. Organize a Wikipedia editathon, write pages for underrepresented groups. And I've actually got a link here to the anti-Black racism statement that I worked on this summer with my Carolinian Canada colleagues, including Indigenous staff. So going back to the panel, I'm going to actually stop that share, I think, and I'll try and leave it up in the background. Not quite sure how this will go. And I'm gonna just turn over to our panel now to kick off with our first question. I'm gonna mute myself. And I think you won't necessarily go in any one order, but you'll just like go round and round, right? Peter, did you want to start off? Would it be helpful, Peter, if I put that slide at the back? Should I just do that?
Yeah, sure. Maybe just to have it in the back.
You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Oh, is this?
Okay, let me see if I can do that. Let me escape. Okay, I'll just put it in the background. And then I should be able to see everyone on the same screen. Okay. Okay, go ahead then, Peter, on the first question.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everyone, first of all, for tuning in, and thanks Don and Shelley and everyone at Queens in York for putting this together. I guess, so I'll kick it off and talk about one of the big challenges that I think prevents a lot of historically excluded people from historically excluded groups from participating. And it's one that's talked about a lot, but I think representation is a really big one. And I know Don touched on this, but in a personal way for me, I almost didn't become a biologist at all because I never saw myself represented in this type of career path. When I was in high school, I was pretty good at science and math, and I really enjoyed it. But I was really set on medicine. I knew Black people who were doctors, and I knew that was like a career that I could see myself in and see myself doing well in. But I didn't know anybody. I hardly knew anyone doing ecology. I definitely didn't know anyone who was Black or a person of color doing ecology. And so it wasn't until I was in university and partway through my undergrad that I started to, all that passion for nature that I had before that was always in me kind of came to the fore, and I started to see other, more diverse cohort of ecologists, and that was when I kind of made the jump into ecology. So I almost wouldn't have been here if I hadn't kind of been, if that representation hadn't been there in my undergrad. So I think that's a really big one, and I'm happy to talk about more, come back to this one after, but I'll let Jacqueline or Jessica take over.
Jump in, Jacqueline or Jess.
I'll go. So as an Indigenous person, I feel like this question is pretty big. I come from a big family. I have 10 aunties and uncles on my Inuit side, but only one of them went to post-secondary. And then I have about 65 cousins on my one side of my family, and I think I know 4 of us who have a undergrad degree. So I think a lot of this stems from how schooling was, I would say, executed in Indigenous communities in like the 50s all the way up until 1996, residential schools and stuff. So it's a very alienated relationship for sure. Indigenous people in school, and it's taken a lot of work and to make kids see the value in school, just in general, and which is a shame because there's such a potential for Indigenous and Inuit youth to participate in ecology. As Inuit, we are stewards for the land anyway. We've been up here, and we have conservation ways, and we look out for the land and we advocate for the land. That's how it always was, and that's how it always will be. So, you know, there's a lot of synergy between ecology and the way we live and the way we look at things. So I think that we need to understand better the legacy of residential schools and boarding schools and stuff like that, and how like colonialism is still kind of being perpetuated onto us through school systems that say, you know, this is the way to know and this is the only way to know, and if you don't understand that, you're not smart. So I think that's definitely the biggest challenge for Indigenous people anyway.
Thanks, Jess. Jacqueline? And I'm responding to a request. They don't want to see the questions. They want to see the speaker. So seeing the speaker.
My research is on outdoor recreation, and outdoor recreation is one of those gateway activities that leads to ecology, conservation, environmental awareness, and environmental activism. And one of the biggest challenges that I see in outdoor recreation and in all those fields is the lack of representation. So in all my decades, most of my decades of hiking, canoeing, skiing, camping, as long as it's outdoors, those are the things that I enjoy. But usually 99% of the time, I'm the only Black person in the group. And when I look at the social media feeds of those organizations, you know, welcome to the great Canadian outdoors. And I play a game of counting the Black face, and most of the time, you don't see us there. When I look at outdoor equipment stores, look at their catalogs, again, it's counting the Black face, you don't see us there. And so this sends a pretty clear message that when it comes to outdoor recreation, Black people are not expected to be there. And we know from research that if you don't see someone like yourself trying something, you're less likely to try it. And for Black people, there are also other issues around safety in the outdoors. But the issue of representation, that we're not there. And I spend a lot of my time in provincial parks. And again, I've yet to see, it's very rare to see Black people on staff. There's only one park that I've been to where there were Black people there. So again, if there are no Black people on staff, you're not seeing us in any of the media images, it again sends the message that if you're Black, please don't come to the parks. You're not wanted here. And those are some of the issues that I'm exploring in my research, but representation is absolutely critical.
Thank you, Jacqueline. So I want to move on then to hear from all of you. What are the concrete steps that we can take to deliver change? Did you want to carry on, Jacqueline, and we'll maybe go backwards with you and then Jess and then Peter? Because I know this is something you're very passionate about and you do research.
Well, the most obvious one is about hiring Black staff. Yes, it's a very basic first step in terms of including Black people in the media images, and that's a good step, which many organizations are currently not doing. But on the ground, you need Black staff because change only happens when you have Black staff. And I think there are too many organizations. I'm fascinated by the explosion in all of these equity and diversity seminars. I've been around the block a few times and I started my career doing a lot of these seminars. So it's really intriguing that decades later, it's the same thing. But the thing that sticks in my mind though, for all of these seminars, for all of these reports, where are the changes? In so many ways, it seems like these seminars are an academic exercise in terms of, let's check our diversity box that we have done the seminars. We now have the knowledge, we understand, but we're still not gonna hire you. And so for me, the real way to make change is hire Black staff. There are enough of us out there. Promote Black and Indigenous staff in those organizations. Give them the support and the tools that they need, that they can thrive. Organizations can get us in, but then the leaky pipeline effect is that once we're in, there's no support. And there are ways through all the microaggressions that we find or we are pushed out. So hire Black staff, promote Black staff, support Black staff. When you go to the provincial or the national parks, if you see Black and Indigenous staff, it tells you that, okay, I've got my back covered. And especially for Black people, that if Black staff are there, you know that you can relax because somebody's not going to call the police because a group of Black people are hanging out in the park. I'll talk maybe a little bit later on about how the frameworks I'm using in terms of how race and space combine and how they shape who is expected to be in certain spaces and who's expected to be absent.
Thank you. So I would say, to sum up, talk is cheap, but action, talk is cheap. Here we are, we're talking. We want to see action. Jess, would you like to tackle this before we move on to Peter? Steps for concrete change, please.
Sure. I also want to echo what Jacqueline said, like representation is super important. I know in my undergrad, I only knew one other Inuit person. I don't know if there was any other Indigenous people in my program, which was super daunting. And the whole time I was there, I felt like I didn't belong and I was making a mistake. But one of the things that I've been doing through my undergrad and after my undergrad was Memorial University has some kind of outreach camps where they send undergrad students into the Nunatziabut communities to do science with kids. And for some of these kids, it's the first time doing something hands-on. And what I envisioned and tried my best to do was to make these outreach activities as culturally relevant as possible, because we're surrounded by science every day. The way we hunt, the way we eat and cook, checking ice, everything is related to science in our own way. And so I tried to make it as relevant as possible to say to them, guys, you do belong in ecology, you belong in science, you're smart. So I think if universities did that more and tried to promote science that way, I feel like it would have a much better impact, because for Indigenous people, I think, I can't even imagine an Indigenous ecology prof, or an Inuit ecology prof. It's just so far out of reach right now. I think we need to start focusing on how to make undergrad more applicable so that they can think about, oh, maybe I do want to do a master's, maybe I do want to become a prof. Because for me, my whole experience was just hang on, just keep doing the work. You're almost done. Just get your 60s, just pass, because there's no way you can do anything above that.
Thanks for being so brave. Thanks for being so brave to share. This is what we're seeing right now. Can I just say, this is the emotional burden of doing this work. Do you want to, should we move on to Peter? And you're okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jess, for that heartfelt explanation of what really is going down. I'll just comment and say we came very close to having an Indigenous professor at York in the biology department. And if anyone wants to privately contact me on the fight that I had with my colleagues to get them to understand what excellence in Indigenous excellent ecologists look like, we could talk about that later with a big bottle of gin. Over to you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacqueline and Jessica. I think I want to echo both of what you're saying. And I want to add on, I think one of the things that I'd like to see change that is incredibly frustrating, I think, from a graduate student perspective, is that whenever we're working on these issues at a university, and a lot of the time when it's in these seminars or in these EDI committees, it seems like it's always the students that are there. And there are a few faculty members, usually the few faculty of color or the few female faculty or Black faculty. And it's never it seems like this burden, there's a really heavy burden, which I think we'll probably talk about more later today, but there's a really heavy burden and a tax to doing this. It's just at the very basic, at the very base of it, this is time away from research to be working on making this field more inclusive. And it's really frustrating from a student perspective when all of the time you're just talking to these professors and you know that you're going to be gone in 2 years or in 4 years, and they're going to be here for the rest of their lives. And you know, the burden is on you to change these things. And there are a few exceptions, obviously, of professors who are doing terrific work within their departments and communities, but it's really frustrating when it's overwhelmingly the students who are expected to push this forward, and overwhelmingly the students of color and the Black students and Indigenous students who are expected to make these changes in the university when we're going to be there for 3-4 years at most. So I think that's one thing that I think really needs to change, is that more faculty needs to be stepping up, more of the faculty that is not already burdened by these things and not already having to overcome these challenges. More of those faculty need to step up in their departments and in their communities and in their professional societies to be working to make ecology more inclusive.
Thank you, Peter. And I think this is a great segue into the undergraduate experience, which Jess has already shared with us. Jacqueline has been in not just in Canada, but in Britain. And I'd like to, if you feel comfortable, guys, can you just maybe talk to us about microaggressions and the undergraduate experience? Because so one of the things that Sailita Guy wants everyone to know is that when you diversify your labs, or you really do this in an active way, you have got to put into place supports for your students. You've got to understand what they're going to be going through. Just the throwaway racist comments that people don't even think are being racist, but they are. Everyone read the racism scale. Jacqueline, would you like to start here with dealing with this kind of thing and how horrible it is?
Well, I started my undergraduate career doing chemistry. I was a chemistry nerd, could spin equations in my head, could do a whole ton of stuff and still quote Shakespeare. Whether it was art or science, I was comfortable in both, but I went to school to do chemistry. And the biggest hurdle that I faced was that I was the only Black person in the entire chemistry department from undergrad right the way up. And I was, I think, one of 3 girls in the entire chemistry department. And I just got tired of being told, you know, girls don't do chemistry, Black girls definitely can't do chemistry. Why are you here? You must have made a mistake, or they've made a mistake. And for me, in the end, when you are a pioneer, it is incredibly hard. So Jessica, I really understand what you're saying, yeah? Because when you're the pioneer, you carry a whole ton of burdens on your shoulders, and you have no one else who looks like you that you can actually sit down and say, this is what's happening. And they can say to you, yeah, this is what's happening. It's not in your mind. This is how the system works. And that sense of isolation, of being the odd one out, that unfortunately has followed me also into outdoor recreation. And so I find yet again that you're dealing with the microaggressions, as in when I lead hikes, people will come up to me and say, I'm looking for the hike leader. And it's like, yeah, that's me. It's like, no, we're looking for the hike leader. And you see the look on their face when they realize it's like, oh, you're leading the hikes? Or there are times when I'm in the ravines, I'm checking out hikes. So many times, very nice, very friendly people will come up to me and say, are you lost? And the very first time it happened, I thought, oh, we're Canadians. We're so polite. They're so lovely and warm and really trying to help each other out. The second, the third, the fourth, the fifth time, it's like, okay, what's happening here? I'm here with a friend. We're in full winter gear. We got the backpacks, the proper hiking boots and everything. But why is it people are so concerned and asking, are we lost? And in the end, I realized it was a coded conversation about race and about space. Black people are expected to be in the city, penned in a concrete jungle. That's where we're supposed to be comfortable. The moment that you're outside in nature, nature is coded as a white space. You showing up means you're out of place, which means that you must be lost. Therefore, we must help you find a way back into the city. And yeah, it's funny, but when you experience this over and over again, the humor kind of disappears. And when you realize the larger implications around it, i.e. it's about race and power, then again, the humor just kind of evaporates.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Yep, I can, yeah. The first time, cute. The 10th time, I don't know, something else is going on. Peter, do you want to follow up with this? And then I don't know whether Jessica will feel able to share. Oh, she's giving me a thumbs up. An incredible story. Incredible story. I still shake my head at it. Go ahead, Peter. Microaggressions. There.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree and have experienced similar things in the outdoors, Jacqueline. For me, it's always, I remember when I was first introduced into kind of birding and to you know, bringing binoculars out and bird watching and whatnot, and how fun it was. I was introduced by some white friends, and it was so cool because, you know, you could just go up to anybody else who also had these big ass binoculars, and it was pretty a high chance that they were also looking for birds. And so you'd, you know, kind of quietly be able to like ask what they're looking for and maybe share some tips or something. And I was really, that was like an experience that was really, really cool to me of that community. And definitely not the experience that I have a lot of the time when I'm outdoors alone looking for birds as well, or looking for butterflies or whatever. It's the whole vibe, the whole atmosphere changes. The way that people interact when I'm alone and with binoculars is much different than when I'm with other friends. And so it's definitely this feeling of a lot of those microaggressions in the outdoors, I think, come from that, like Jacqueline was saying, that sense of place and of where people expect you to be. And on university campus as well, I think it, you know, it falls a lot of the time. A lot of people are just not, they just don't think about these things. It's funny how smart everybody is in grad school, and yet they really just have a knack for not realizing what they're saying and what, you know, how inappropriate some of the things they are saying are. Whether you're out in the field and they're saying, commenting on their tan and saying how they're black now too because they're almost as dark as me. I mean, a lot of these small things are, you know, just completely inappropriate and just highlight how different we are from the rest of the majority group here. And it definitely doesn't make ecology a welcoming place to be when things like that happen and people don't do anything about it afterwards.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff going on under the guise of, oh, I'm just joking. Words are powerful and they hurt. And with that, because this is our third question and I'm cognizant of time, Jess, if you're up for it, are you willing to share that story you told me?
So I already talked a lot about like how the kind of the negative parts of undergrad. But before, I actually did go on a field trip before, a field course in England, and we were at a trout farm, and the guy who was showing us around, he's saying, you know, people who eat a lot of fish have really healthy hearts and all this stuff. And then my prof, he said, like Eskimos. And then I was kind of hoping to embarrass him. I would say, hey, I'm an Eskimo. And then in front of everyone, he said, well, you're not full Eskimo. And I was like, well, I eat like one, so I have a healthy heart. And it was just like so embarrassing because it's like, okay, I'm not white enough for you, and I'm not Eskimo enough for my people. Like, what is going on? And then I also had like these microaggressions follow me into my workplace. I only had one position that kind of related to ecology, but it was like my first day on the job. I was getting a tour of the building and stuff and meeting people in the office, and I was talking with this guy, and I was with the HR lady, so someone, you know, the friendly lady who makes sure everyone's okay at the office. She was showing me around, and then I started talking to this guy about, he's like, where are you from and stuff, and I'm telling him like, oh, I'm Inuit, I'm from up north. And then the HR lady says to me, oh, tax breaks. And I said, no, I don't get tax breaks because when your ancestors came to colonize Canada, we were still up north living the dream. And so for me, it's fun to shut them down and put them in their place, but it's still like, oh, is that what you think of me still? Like you can find out everything you need to know on the internet. Why not look it up in your spare time? And it's just so frustrating, and it's like the same thing over and over and over again. It's like, why don't you know more? Why don't you know more?
Yeah. So it's exhausting for you, right? It's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's just tiring, and again and again and again. So I guess what I'd maybe like to do is get you guys to sort of combine 4 and 5, which is you'd really rather be doing your research and publishing those papers as scholars, or doing your scientific work that you're employed to do, Jess, because you've actually you're in like your second ecology related job now as an energy lead, because of the pandemic. You ended up leaving your other job, working in sonar for marine mammals based in Halifax. So this is just kind of going on and on and on. And so can we maybe have you guys reflect, if you don't mind, on what do you need, the professors, the people in universities and colleges where you've been, academics, as well as your peers, the students, the graduate students, what do we need to be doing, like concrete steps, more than just talking? I don't know, Jess, do you want to go first, or do one of the others want to go? I'm open with any order.
I'll go. I think the first thing that we need to do, I did a program at Dalhousie University a few years ago. It was a 2-month program on ocean governance, and we often did have Indigenous people come to talk to us. It was just all day, different people coming in from different fields, and like a crash course on whatever. And I heard through the grapevine that, the Indigenous people weren't being paid. And I know that's a common thing in universities. We always ask elders to come give a lesson, and we don't pay them. We ask people to do things like this, and we don't pay them because I don't know why the knowledge of this doesn't seem as valuable as a prof's lecture, I guess. So I think that's the first thing that definitely needs to change, is that we need to start looking at this knowledge as legit and pay people to share this information, to be advocates for diversity work, all of it.
Great. And I can share that we are paying our EDI experts honoraria, and they are going to hire me as their unpaid agent to get them even more paid. Jacqueline, I got you a raise. Yay! This is so important. There is this assumption that this kind of work, everyone has the luxury of doing it. And if we instead of universities, we were Apple or IBM, EDI consultants, say there's been a case of racism problems or sexism and misogyny, the consultants that come in get paid like $10,000 a day. So there's big money involved, but why don't we do it? So we need to do that. Jess, I think, thank you. That's great. Jacqueline or Peter, what?
I think that in my field, most of outdoor recreation occurs in provincial and national parks and in conservation areas. And in those areas, there needs to be a discussion around the fact that we're doing our recreation on Indigenous land. So many of the signs and the plaques in those areas, and I'm the person who reads all of them, they celebrate a white European history. Who was here, who did what? And it's like, okay, but this is Indigenous land. Where are the plaques that tell the Indigenous stories, the Indigenous history of this place that we're standing in? So that's a big issue. Another issue is that in Toronto, Black and other people of color are 50% of the population. I've been on some of the climate crisis protests, and I was really surprised and very, very pleased to see that the people there reflected the Toronto subway, i.e. completely multicultural. Yet still, when you look at the leadership, whether in the conservation, the ecology, the environmental groups, the leadership is nearly 90% white. So there's a huge disconnect between what is happening on the ground. We do care about the environment, but the leadership does not reflect that. So I think the leadership has to change. And for many environmental groups, conservation groups, their membership is falling. As the membership, which is older and white, as they age and die, nothing is coming up through the pipeline. They need people like us to come up through the pipeline. But in order to reach us, they have to build a bridge to social justice. It's going to be hard for a Black person to be really interested in saving the whale or saving the bear if you're concerned about the police down the road. But if those environmental conservation groups can find a bridge to social justice, meet us halfway on our terms, then we're more likely to support those issues, because there is no planet B. The environmental crisis affects us too, but you have to build a bridge to the issues that we face in our everyday lives as well.
Thank you. And last word on this to Peter.
Yeah, I think I want to really echo the comments that were made before too about, you know, compensating the people for doing this work. I mean, it's really, someone earlier in the summer asked me like, oh, when they saw how I was, you know, doing some talks on equity, diversity, and inclusion and tweeting about this a lot, someone asked, oh, like, you must really enjoy doing this. And I said, no, of course not. This is terrible. I really wish I was doing anything but having to spend time making this field more inclusive. It's not a fun thing to do. It's not a fun thing to talk about. And I wish I could just concentrate on the research that I really enjoy. I like to look at bees and butterflies. I don't want to have to talk about this. And so it's a really big, it's a cost from taking time away from other things you want to be doing, whether it's art or science or literature. And it's also a really big emotional burden of having to talk about this and of having to be the expert in the room when people want to talk about it. People expect you to have answers, and you shouldn't have to have them. But if you don't, then it feels to you like you're missing out on an opportunity. And I think that's something that people don't always realize. And so when they don't even value the work you are doing, then that really hurts. And it's something that's not, I think it holds back a lot of the progress we could be making. And I think the other thing is that, you know, there are people that spend their whole lives looking at these types of issues, and how doing research like Jacqueline, of looking at how race intersects with outdoors and how we can be doing this better. People looking at how academia can be doing things like how be more inclusive. And I think it's so rare that professors bring up these other experts. It's like STEM, if you're in ecology, you have to only talk with ecologists about equity, diversity, and inclusion. I don't see why we can't be bringing in social scientists often in these seminars or in these discussions in departments and faculties. I think these are the people that really know the research on it and how we can shift these things. I think we should be talking to them more as well, and valuing the work that they're doing and the research they're doing.
Thank you. So that's a lot of really concrete steps. I'd like to give our nearly 130, give or take, guests the chance to maybe email some questions in the chat box. We've covered a lot of stuff, and I've been getting private comments. Maybe what I'll do, just to shift off, is ask you to comment on, and you have covered this, recognizing Indigenous scholarship and other ways of knowing. Jacqueline's actually implied this as well, with the leadership of the conservation movement representing other viewpoints. How do we do that actively when there are cases at the University of Toronto where an astronomer who is Indigenous was seeking to bridge the gap between what I call traditional Western ways of doing astronomy and First Nations ways, and he was sort of given a very rough ride at an interview. Basically told that wasn't really science. I don't know whether, Jess, do you want to lead this one off? And I would just say that one of the reasons why we can have such articulate young Indigenous people speaking like Jess is because actually Nunavut has instituted a fantastic education program about the land claim, and that is spreading. So I am accustomed to working with people like Jess who are trained to be leaders, to speak out. There are ways of having these programs to empower and give them platforms and support. So So if you think Jess is amazing, there is a ton of amazing young Indigenous leaders just like her. You just haven't met them yet. Go ahead, Jess.
Okay, in ecology specifically, there is such a big potential to collaborate with Indigenous people. Like, it's the way we live, the way we think about things is essentially what you are doing. And we really, really, really need to foster that connection and help Indigenous people see the value in the way they look at the world. And I just want to share, like, I talked about how isolating it was in undergrad for me, but I do have instances where I felt like the most special and the most smartest person in the room, for sure. You know, I did have courses that were less like hard science and more qualitative, I guess, and it allowed me to incorporate the way I think or the things I consider as an Indigenous person into my work, and it was really, really appreciated. So there are ways that we can incorporate Indigenous scholarship or Indigenous ways of knowing into traditional science. You know, like, there's like the Torngat Mountains National Park in Northern Labrador. It's the only park in Canada fully owned and operated by Inuit people. So there's lots of ideas that profs can be incorporating into their work that will give students the chance either to learn about something that is relevant to them as Indigenous people, or give white or non-Inuit students the chance to learn about something else. Because you know, a lot of bridging the gap for us is having professors and other white scholars learn about something specific to Nunatsiavut and come to Nunatsiavut and say, this is amazing, you're good at what you do, I'll hire you on as a research assistant or whatever, and then maybe later they go to school for it. It can be, it goes both ways, I guess.
Thanks, Jess. I'm actually going to sort of call a close to our formal questions, because there is a lot of questions piling up in the chat box. So including ones about what Jess was just talking about. Jacqueline and Peter, are you okay if we move on to these questions? Do you feel like we've covered? Okay, so, okay, where to start? Okay, there's a lot of good questions here. So one of the questions that I think applies across the board, so the question is, what's an ethical way to establish a relationship with Indigenous people working in an ecosystem you're studying? And how do we start to expand our philosophy of science? So making those connections, I think that applies not only to Indigenous people, Métis, First Nations, Inuit, but also to members of racialized communities. Like, if you don't have a whole lot of Black friends to chat to, how do you reach out? I think that's a good question, because I think a lot of people are feeling helpless. A lot of white people are feeling helpless. They want to do something, but they don't know how to do this in a respectful way. Anyone jump in? Jess, you want to start first, and then we'll go around. How do you make those connections?
So, like, the way I think about it, because we have rural communities, like, we don't have highways or nothing, so you're either in the community or you're out. I just think about how when I was sent to school, I had to force myself to conform to a way that wasn't normal to me. I had to make eye contact with people, I had to shake people's hands, stuff like that. So it was uncomfortable, but I got used to it. And I feel like if you're in a community doing research, get out in the community, say hi to people, talk to people, try to learn more, ask questions. That's a start.
I think for me, it's in the provincial and the national parks, it's having Indigenous people on staff as permanent staff, not just as the elders who come in to do the ceremonies, the land acknowledgement, then they're gone. Because when they're on staff, they can ask questions that are relevant to their community and from their perspective. They have a degree of knowledge that, look at the California wildfires that are happening right now. If they had followed Indigenous fire management practices, perhaps those fires would not be so bad. but having Indigenous people on permanent staff and in management positions is one way of actually starting the ball rolling. And likewise, I've taken part in a few citizen science projects and BioBlitz outreach. And again, for those organizations, where is your outreach to Black and Indigenous communities? Because I'm not seeing us reflected there. And whether it's the online or go out in your neighborhood, but those organizations are not doing the outreach. They're not finding the ways to get us because we want to be there. And it makes me question at times, I'm not an ecologist, but how accurate is the data that you're actually collecting? Because if you're only collecting data by white people in areas where they feel comfortable, i.e. in their white neighborhood, how accurate is your actual sampling about wildlife in the city, whether it's birds, which is what I'm interested in, plus other things, but how accurate is your actual sampling? And I think having Black and other people of color there will force those organizations to actually address those so-called scientific basis on which they're making their predictions, because I think their sample is biased.
It's not only you that thinks it's biased, it is biased. It's not inclusive. Okay, Peter, go. You're right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think
the questions are piling up, so go ahead.
Yeah, I agree 100% with everything Jess and Jacqueline said. And I think when it comes to trying to build any relationship with any community, I think it's important to be genuine and to be not afraid to make mistakes and apologize for them. I don't think you should obviously aim to make mistakes. You should aim to be doing everything as well as you can. But if you're genuine, you know, I think regardless when you're dealing with a community that you don't know or a culture that you don't know, you'll probably make a mistake at one point. And as long as when someone tells you that, you can be like, you know, actually sorry and actually consider about what you've done and then actually take steps to fix it, then I think that will go a really, really long way.
And if I could just add, I've got questions piling up and we have to wind up in a couple of minutes. I don't know whether we could go like 3 minutes longer. One of the things that everyone should just do is just ask for information, ask for help. If you meet a colleague or a member of a First Nations, ask them, what is your First Nation and how do I pronounce it properly? So for Peter, whose name looks like Soroye, but it is not, I spent a lot of time learning how to pronounce that properly because that is respect. And it's so simple. It's so simple, and just say, I don't know, I'm going to learn from you. Just one thing before I go to another question. I think we've got enough time for one more, but I did have a question from my colleagues because we've got questions coming in from people who aren't professors. But for those of my colleagues who are asking, any thoughts on how to deal with aggressive pushbacks when advocating for diversity, cliches like hiring based on excellence, blind neutral to race, etc. Guys, contact me because there isn't an argument like that I haven't pushed back on, and it usually involves going to the peer-reviewed research literature from social sciences to say, dudes, this is not objective or neutral. The biases start from day one. Hello? Read these 15 papers so I can give you those papers to tell people to read. All I can say is someone like Jordan Peterson is lucky he has never been in my front room because I don't know what would have happened to him. Okay, so another question. Ethical people. How can I help my students feel supported in a white institution? I'm going to give everyone 10 seconds on that one. What's the one thing you would do if it feels like a really white place? Just a small thing people can do. I'm looking for the next question.
Very quickly, recognize it's a white space, that white is also racialized, that white is a race, that discussions around meritocracy, I got here on merit, I got here because I was the best, that those are code words for talking about whiteness, that white is a race, and talk about whiteness as a race without going pink in the face. Because if you can't identify your own race, how on earth are you going to be able to talk to people like us about race?
Thank you. Who's next?
I don't think I could say anything better than how Jacqueline just said it. So I'm gonna let Jess take a go.
I agree.
Okay, guys, we're actually coming to the end of our time. There's a few more questions here. There's also a couple of suggestions for readings and some thanks and bouquets to us for organizing the panel. Lots of feedback to say this is really helpful. Yeah, okay, Daniel, that's great. We have another reading. Okay, suggestions, ways. I think we've covered a lot of it. At this point, okay, one new message, thank you. Okay, it's just, okay, yeah, there's loads of reading. I mean, do the homework. I tell everyone, just do the work. There's work to be done. I'd like to, at this point, because we're coming to an end, thank our panel members for your honesty and your emotions and your energy that you've brought to this. This is hard work. And what we really want to do is get everybody being part of the work, because when you're sharing the work, it does, I think, help the activists and the trailblazers and the leaders that you're hearing from today on this panel keep the faith and keep going. Because otherwise you feel like you're talking to a wall, right? Banging your head against a brick wall. And at this point, I'm just going to say we will keep the questions or the comments and summarize them and try and respond to them. We've got the slides that are there. We'll share those. And I'm going to turn over now to thank our panel. Please applaud everybody. Give the reaction gif of that big applause. I'm putting my one out. Thank you, thank you. Thanks to everyone for attending and taking busy time out of your busy days and getting Zoomed out. We're all Zoom fatigued. And I'm going to turn over to Shelley for last words. But before I do, Jess, Peter, Jacqueline, would you like to have any last words or comments? Oh, and okay, Silita, I'm just supposed to say from Silita that provide the platform supports for your students from racialized communities to understand what they're going through. You can't have them in your classes and your courses without putting in the supports for what they may be experiencing. You have to, and that's a process. Okay, and anyone, one last word before we turn over to Shelley?
I just want to thank everyone for coming and listening to us. I hope it helped you a little decide what to do next, because that's what it's all about. What do we do next?
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for the organizers of it, and yeah, thank you. If you're here, then obviously this is something you care about. So I'm happy to see what you do after this. Thanks.
Quick thanks to everyone for coming, and I hope that the webinar is not a one-off, that real change will happen. So if we have it again next year, it will be reporting on changes. But thanks to everyone for coming.
Okay, and I'll just wrap things up by once again thanking our panelists and Dawn for moderating. You've certainly given us a lot to think about, and I really appreciate you taking the time and energy to do this. And I agree. It's one thing to listen, but what really counts is what action we have. And I hope this time next year we will have lots to report on for you. So thanks again, and thanks everyone who attended.